Okay, so in this video we're going to create the actual path this time, but before we do so, let's just save our current scene because we're currently using a sample scene. So let's click File and Save As. We'll just put it into Scenes and we'll call it Forest or something like that. Okay, so what I'm wanting to do is basically look at this overhead. Yep, something like that. I want to be able to see my character and be able to kind of sculpt a walkway, a path around there. So in my terrain tools then, we're on the sculpt bridge and I just want to set some values. So for my brush strength, 0.5. For my brush size, I'm going to make this about 8. That's a relatively good amount, 8 meters. My brush rotation I'm going to keep there, and my brush spacing on 0. My width profile on 1. My height offset, I want this to be slightly below the ground, so I'm going to right click, edit key. I want it to be about 0.2 below the ground, so that's 0.2 of a meter below the ground. Just press enter, do the same on the other side, right click, edit key, 0.2. Alright, let me slightly indented into the ground. Strength profile I'm keeping on 1. And my horizontal profile, I just want to sort of, try and get a little bit of curvature going on. So to begin with, it's on 1. I'm going to right click and add a key. Just going to drag this up a little bit, right click and add another key. So for this first key, I'm going to edit this one and put it onto about 3 meters. And for my second one, I'm going to right click, edit key, make this one about -2. Okay, so what I end up with is basically like a bit of a curve like this, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to start where my character is, so control and click in order to start here, and I'm just going to go maybe at a bit of a diagonal this way. Okay, and I get a little bit of a curve coming out like that. And now maybe I'll come this way, so I'll get another bit of a curve coming this way, and I'll get another path coming over here. Okay, so now we've got a series of paths. Now before I go too far ahead, let me just click over to my game tab, and I want to see what this looks like in the game scene itself. So, okay, it looks like the path has actually been elevated. Okay, I think I set it to 0.2 instead of -0.2. Okay, my mistake. So let me go back to the scene, and I'm going to do edit, undo bridge tool, and undo bridge tool. I'm going to go to my height offset. Yep, I've set it to the positives, haven't I? So it needs to be -0.2, so it's below the ground. Edit key, -0.2. Great, let's try that again. So like around here, might do one around here. It really doesn't matter where you go, experiment. Might even do another one up here. Okay. So now in my game view, yep, I can see my path as I'm walking along it. Just press shift if you want to run. Yep, so I can definitely see where the paths are. I think they're kind of wide enough for me to be able to walk in, etc. Yep, it's good. Now notice that this is a really, really small environment. Some games will be this small. Others you might want to really extend this terrain out to be like 300 or 400 meters. But I'm fine with it being small. Just press escape to come out of this. Excellent. All right, so I'm quite happy with that. Now, what I want to do is start connecting some of these up, creating other elements. What effectively I'm wanting is a path that will always lead the character back to where they started, so that they can't really get lost. So this would be like a classic figure 8 configuration or a circle configuration that is used a lot in open world systems, so the character can't really get lost, they sort of make their way back, as opposed to something like, let's say, sort of Call of Duty games where you're always progressing forward, you're never going back. So in that case you're going kind of on the straight line forward. On this game where there's not really any objectives or anything, we want to be able to explore, but we don't want to get lost. So I'm gonna control click at the end of this one, and I'm just maybe gonna come up here a bit. I'm gonna control there, maybe come back over to this one, so connect that. Control on this one and connect these two, and then control there. I might come over to here, control and connect this one, control, come up to maybe here, and then control and connect this one. Now you may notice that there's a few odd edges on some of these, so let's just quickly go into the game tab and just try this out in the game itself. So I might just go this way. Remember, hold shift in order to run. Yep, you can see a little bit of a ridge there that connects some of these, but they're quite nice. You know, it's an easy path to follow, but there's a few kind of ridges, so let's sort those out. So press control and just come up to the play. So in our scene we now need to go back into perspective mode and just get close to these. Now whether it's easier to switch the light off, which I think it is, we can now see some of these areas here. So it's just a case of coming into our paint terrain, and we've got something called smooth height. Okay, I'm just going to take like a soft brush and just bring down the brush size. And by the way, these these controllers, these sliders, can also be accessed by the shortcuts. So if we come to edit and shortcuts, you will see that under the terrain we've got a whole bunch of shortcuts. So the strength is A, the brush size is S, and the rotation is D. That's all those three. So let's use that. So S, and just move your mouse left and right. So yeah, about that size. The strength is currently on 1, which might be a little bit too much, I'm not sure. Rotation we don't have to worry about. So let's just click and drag, and notice how that just softens that out and bridges the gap between those two. Let's have a look for any others. So yeah, it's a really obvious one there, isn't it? So let's just soften all that out so they kind of easily connects with each other. The one here. So it's just a matter of clicking and dragging in order to do that. Still a little bit of a ridge, but it's fine, that's okay. I've got another little bit there. Yep, got some over here. Not sure if I've already done that one or not. If you find it's taken ages to actually get where you need to be, as long as you got the terrain selected, wherever your mouse is, you can just press F and it will actually zoom you directly in. It's sort of framing it inside of your window. Yeah, just soften that bit out there. I think I've already done that one, haven't I? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where we started from. So yeah, okay, that's looking better. So let's test it out for the game view then. Just going to do a bit of a shift run. Yep, some nice sort of transition now, and you can see where the path is. There's even a little bit of a bump there, which, I don't know, it's kind of nice. You don't always want your path to be perfectly straight. Yep. Now you know, for this character you can actually see that it's got a head bobbing going on. which makes him more like a proper first-person character. I kind of find it annoying when I'm testing out my scenes. So I'm just going to press escape and come out of this. And in the hierarchy, if I select my FPS controller and in the inspector, we can actually switch that off, use head bob, and that way we get a nice fluid, smooth movement. Okay, now it's time to put some materials on this map. Before we get too far ahead, just remember to do a file and save. Alright, it's always important to sort of save your progress regularly. Unity can crash from time to time. So we can see at the moment we've got no textures at all on this, and it's looking a little bit dodgy. So let's get it textured. Inside of the project, if we come to our assets, we've got our PBR ground materials, and these are really, really good. If we go into our materials folder, we check out the dirt, we can see we've got a whole range of dirt materials, so all sorts of things that we can use in order to texture the ground, as well as various grass materials as well. So we're going to be using these. The one that I'm going to be laying down initially as a base texture is Dirt 02. So in the textures folder, you can see everything's inside of its folder. We've got a bunch of maps, so we've got our diffuse map and our normal map, which is mostly what we'll need. If you were putting this onto like a game object, you've also got ambient occlusion, height map, and a specular map as well. We only need these two for the terrain. Okay, so let's do that now. So let's go to our hierarchy, click on our terrain, and in the inspector, we're going to come back to our paintbrush again and choose paint texture. Okay, so this adds a material to the terrain. Oh, we've actually got a material on the terrain, but we're going to be able to actually paint directly onto the terrain. Now the base material is applied universally across the entire terrain. So we can find this under the layers. It's currently saying there's no layers, so we're going to add one. We're actually going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this one base mud. Okay, all is one word with capitals. It doesn't really matter if you do add spaces, it's entirely up to you. It's just I've got a convention that I work with, and just click create. It's going to ask us what texture do we want to use. Well, we want to use dirt underscore 02, and that's this diffuse. Double click on it, notice it gets set all across the map. If we now click on this and we click layer properties, we can go into its properties and choose a normal map, and this is dirt 02 again. Apply the normal. Now it really comes out with that level of detail. Our normal scale, I'm going to reduce this a little bit down to about 0.6. Alright, so if you go above 1, if you go like 3 or 4, it's going to be really, really pronounced and really, you know, it's going to look really intense. But if you come below 1, it's going to start to reduce that intensity. Now when we get really close, although it looks interesting, what we can see is that we're getting a lot of tiling. The tiling is going to be more obvious on a flat environment than it is on a sculpted environment. So if we take a look through our game tab at the moment, it looks okay when our character is very close to it. If I just press play at the moment, it looks okay there. But then when we look over there, take a look, we can see the amount of tiling that's going on there. So we want to try and avoid flat surfaces as much as possible. Now at the moment it's pretty good, but I actually want to increase the size of this. So I want to increase the tiling size. So let's press escape and come out of this. So where we have our X and Y tiling, I want to change this to 4 by 4. So notice how everything gets a lot bigger. So now in my scene view, okay, things are now a lot bigger. We can notice more details. The actual tiling itself is a little less obvious when it's bigger. Okay, but yeah, as a ground texture, we're going to see bits of this kind of showing through. All right, so this is like an underlying base, if you like. It's looking, yeah, quite nice. Now, at the moment, it's a little bit bright. So what we can do with this is we can mess around with these PBR elements. PBR is like physical based rendering. So it actually takes into consideration lighting, smoothness based on I think it's metallicity, is it? It's like the metallic element of it. And it can basically make it look like metal or like plastic or whatever. You can create realistic looking materials. So what we're going to do with this, with our metallic, we're going to increase this to 0.681. Notice how that darkens it down quite a lot. And for our smoothness, we're going to make this around 0.246. Okay, the more smoother it is, the wetter the entire ground looks, so it can simulate sort of like wet mud. So now when we check it out, yeah, it's looking a bit better, isn't it? We may need to change some of these values when we actually bake our Lithtmap a little bit later, but overall that's looking a bit more like sort of mud. Alright, good. So that's our base texture, and now what we want to do is actually texture this path. The material that I want to use for the path is going to be dirt 14. So if you want to check this one out, it's going to be this one. See if we can make it a little bit bigger. Dirt 14. All right, so this one's quite a nice one. So under terrain, inspector, back to our paintbrush. We now need to create a new layer. So let's call this path. Just path will be fine. Let's create this. It's going to be dirt underscore 14. I'm going to double click. Now notice it doesn't overwrite anything yet because it's a secondary map. You have to paint secondary maps in. Just click on it. And then the normal map is going to be dirt underscore 14 and just select the normal. Alright, great. I'm going to leave everything as it is for now. I'm going to change this once I've actually painted it on there. So for this one, we're actually going to do a bit of painting. So my brush strength is at 1. My jitter, I'm going to bring all the way down to 0. So I want it to remain on a strength of 1. And my brush size, well, it's too small at the moment. So I want to increase my brush size. Shortcut is S, so it's because I've got that selected. Let me just press enter out of that. S is the shortcut for this, so yeah, roughly about this size. And my brush rotation, I do want quite a bit of jitter on this and various bits of rotation. My brush spacing, I actually want to bring this right down to 0. Brush spacing when you're painting will actually give you a nice sort of diffusion of painting without any brush spacing. If I just paint now, I'm going to end up with something like that. Alright, which looks a little bit not so good. Control Z to undo. If I have brush spacing on quite a bit, what I'm going to end up with is something that looks better. It's sort of more diffuse in there. It looks more natural. Control Z to undo. But for this one, I am actually going down to 0. Now I'm wanting to actually paint just the path, but I don't want to affect these outer parts. So what we can use, we can actually use some of the brush mask filters to help us to do that. So if you just come back to the documentation, we can see that we've got a section for brush mask filters, and these are mostly to help you during the painting. You've got a whole bunch of filters to use. So if you click list of brush mask filters, we've got all sorts of things like aspect is great and concavity. The one that I'm wanting to use is slope. Okay, so it basically affects the angle at which surfaces can be painted, and it's based on a remap curve. So what we're wanting basically is anything that is completely horizontal. Anything that's not completely horizontal is then ignored. and that's going to be great for making sure it only goes in the middle and doesn't paint these bits at the side. Okay, so if you get close, by the way, if you've got your lighting on, I'd recommend switching your lighting off as you're painting. It's just going to be a lot easier. So as I get close to this, I might want to choose a more interesting brush, like maybe a noise brush or something. Now it's probably a little bit big at the moment, the size, so let me make the size a bit smaller, something like this. Okay, and if I click my brush mask filters and choose slope. Okay, so this is the slope. The strength is the amount that it actually affects what you're painting. The feature size is basically, at the moment you can see it's orange, that's what it's going to paint. And at the moment it's painting absolutely everything. If I increase my feature size, it's only going to paint large objects. If I make it small, it's going to paint even the tiniest little details. So what we need to change is basically the remap curve, and it's this little curve, right, this little point right here, that determines the angle at which it's going to paint. So for example, at that point, anything up to 45-degree angle will get painted. Well, if we move more toward this side, so let's go with 0.12, what we can now see is anything that's blue doesn't get painted. So for example, if I'm painting there, I can now paint right up to the edge, but without actually painting that bit. Don't be careful not to go too far, because obviously that orange on the top will still be painted, but that's going to allow us to get a nice sort of edge going along there. Okay, yeah, so let's give this a go then. So make sure that you've got path selected, brush strength of 1, and the size, well, I'm going with about 7 on this one. So now it's just a case of actually painting all the way along. Now notice it's randomly rotating my brush, giving me a kind of a nice sort of edge effect. Now it looks very similar, doesn't it, to the other texture that I've got underneath it. If I just switch on my lighting, yeah, it's about the same, isn't it? So what we could do so that we can see this a little better is we can make the metallic really intense, and that way we can see it much better. So I can see I need to get closer to this edge. Oh, I'm just painting a little bit on top there. I can always erase that out later, not a problem. So it's just a case of now basically going through all of this and just painting it up. And obviously coming along this way as well. Okay, so I've made the start. So what I want you to do, ready for the next video, is basically go through that and just texture that entire path so it's all complete. Okay, so you should now have a completed path. If you've made a few little mistakes on the side like I have, not a problem, don't worry, we can always sort those out later. Okay, so let's just take a look through our game tab and just check this out. So the path is relatively nice, isn't it? It's distinguishable from the actual mud itself, and it's just got a few things like leaves and a few like little pebbles and those kind of things that just add to an extra level of realism. Now obviously we have got a lot of tiling going on with this, but when we start to sort of sculpt the ground so it's not so flat, it's not going to be so obvious. And once we've got things like shadows and rocks and all different things on it, it's going to look far better. Now at the moment I think the texture is probably a little bit too small, the tiling, although it's probably accurate. I mean, that looks photo accurate to me. The tiling is a little bit too obvious. So what I'm going to do is just increase the tiling repetition from 2 to 4 and see what that looks like. So what I mean by that is coming back onto our paintbrush, just make sure that we have our path selected, And where we have our size of our tilings, 2 by 2, let's just try 4 by 4. Let's see what it looks like now. Okay, so notice it's a lot more visible now, a lot bigger. There's a little bit less tiling. I'm wondering if maybe it's a little bit too big. It almost looks like we're zoomed in toward the ground, doesn't it? Perhaps then I might come down to like 3 by 3. Let's try that. Yeah, okay, I think I like this one better. Okay, yep, quite effective. So let's just take a look at its metallic. Probably want to reduce this a little bit down to about 0.867 is what I've decided on, and my smoothness to 0.173. Okay, my normal scale is pretty good. In fact, I could increase this a little bit, but to like maybe 1.3. And let's just check this out. Yep, so notice now it's a little bit more rough on the ground. In fact, perhaps too rough actually. Maybe it's kind of, those leaves are sort of sticking up a little bit too much, aren't they? So yeah, I might keep my normal at about 1, I think. Okay, so that is our path for now. Don't worry too much about the tiling of this, it's all going to get sorted. Now what we want to do is place a few trees, a few select trees in place so that we can start to see some kind of interesting shadowing that's going to go on. I mostly want to look at trees in the center of the game. So as long as you've got your terrain selected, in your inspector we've got a little section that's called paint trees. If we click on this, we can click edit trees and add a tree. And our tree prefab, we're going to click the little target to choose a tree. And what we're going for is a conifer tree. Make sure I spell it correctly, conifer. There it is, conifer desktop. This one comes as part of your standard assets pack. So just double click in order to select that and choose add, and it appears in your list. As long as you've got it selected, you can now start to paint that. Now if I paint at the moment, check out what happens. I get absolutely thousands of them. In my game view it's actually so dark because I'm surrounded by trees I can't even see. So let's do Control Z to undo that. And it says here, click to paint trees, hold shift and click to erase trees, or if you've got multiple trees you can hold Control and click to erase only one type of tree. So our brush size at the moment is way too big. Let's reduce this down. That's probably too small. Yep, something like this. And our tree density is way too much. So what I want to do is come down to, the lowest amount is 10. I want to come to about 12, something like this. This is going to allow me to sort of click and paint in individual trees, which is what I want. The tree height, I'm going to see how that works out, and we've got a little bit of colour variation between each tree. So now what I can do is I can click in order to set a specific tree. So let's just put a few in here. Just be careful not to add too many trees at this point. And you can obviously click and drag in order to set like loads of trees right next to each other if you want. I prefer just kind of like placing these trees at the moment. These are sort of like the more foreground element trees. So when we click over to our game view, we can now see that we've got a lot of shadows. We've got our various trees. So we can see what these look like. Now check out my frames per second in my stats. So it's had an effect on that. I was formerly getting about 1200 frames per second. I'm now getting about 600, so it's halved it. My batches are about 86, and my triangles are about 1 million. All right, so trees, quite a lot of them have a lot of vertices. All right, and a lot of triangles. So in terms of polygons, obviously your triangles, it takes 2 triangles to make a polygon. So you would effectively halve the amount of triangles to get your amount of polygons. So at roughly about 1 million triangles, obviously I've got about 500,000 polygons at the moment in the scene, and there's not even a great deal in there at the moment. Now these shadows are coming out black at the moment because this is real-time lighting. But overall, I think there's a good level of trees for the center area there. We're going to have loads of trees in this area behind here, for example, and around. These are our central area trees, and what I'm looking at is the ground. Okay, so I'm wanting to see, are there areas that are open like this where you can see lots of sunlight, and then there's areas of shadow. Now just like, for example, this area is immersed in shadow. You don't want the entire central section to be completely immersed in shadow. You want these like little patches of light that come through. Okay, this is what makes things look quite nice. So you know where I made like the line of 5 trees? I'm gonna sort that out. I think there's too many trees in that bit. So it was, where was it? I think it was here, I think. Oh no, it's there. I can see it, where I got these trees really, really close to each other. So if I now hold shift, I can actually take a couple of those trees out. I might even take this one out as well. And just maybe paint one a little bit closer. Nope. Too close to the edge. Yeah, something like that. And I could probably do with a tree there, I think. Yeah, just for now. Obviously we can add more trees as we go along. But overall, yeah, I think this is pretty good at the moment. I might actually just take out that central tree from there so it creates a little bit more light. So when I go into my game scene now, see, although we've got some areas of darkness, we've got plenty of areas that are quite light. Great. Okay, that's a path there, so that's why it's left open. All right, good. So let's take a look at this lighting at the moment. The shadows are kind of coming off in this direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my hierarchy and choose my directional light. It's effectively my sunlight. With my rotation, I can click and drag on this X in order to actually change where the shadows are. So I actually want them to be relatively close to the trees. Let's try and get a good estimate. I mean, that's kind of interesting. I want them to be something like this, where they're relatively close, and then on the Y you can actually turn this around so you can get the shadows to sort of, you know, be at a certain angle to each other. Let's just switch back on this lighting from here. Now the issue we've got here is we've got a lot of shadows coming over that side, so that's not so good. So let's, maybe we can have these sort of overhead, this overhead shadow. Notice how you can get this to kind of come over here a little bit. Yeah, maybe something like this might be good. So let's see. Yeah, so we've got these kind of like interesting sort of black shadows coming out here, but we've got plenty of sunlight. And I think that's quite nice, a nice bit of a pattern going on the ground there. Okay, good, quite happy with that. Now, the actual colour of the sunlight itself is sort of very orangey. So what I want to do is I actually want to change this color a little bit to make it a little bit more like daytime. So I'm just going to click on the color itself, and I've got an hexadecimal code that I can just type in. So it's D6 E7. Whoa, that's turned purple. E9. So we get this more kind of daylighty type color. My intensity, I'm going to increase this to about 1.4, so it's quite bright. And yeah, I think I'm quite happy with everything else there. So if we go in now, you can see that it's got a little bit more of a kind of a daylight type feel to it. We can tint the actual colour of the scene later using the post-processing, but for now I just want to kind of simulate a real light source. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with the way that that looks. So what we can do now is actually bake ourselves a light map, and it's going to make working on this a lot better. Alright, so at the moment it looks a little bit, you know, it looks a bit tacky at the moment because we're using real direct lighting. So before we actually bake our light map, we need to ensure that our terrain is marked as static, which it is. So static basically makes sure that it can do all of this stuff, and one of those is basically light mapping. Anything not marked as static will not be included in the light map. So that's going to include the terrain and the trees, etc. Okay, and when we add rocks and stuff later, we have to make sure that they are marked as static. Now, what is a light map? So this is going to bake the lighting that we can currently see into a texture, and the texture is going to, well, Unity is going to simulate the bouncing of light all across your scene, giving it a far more realistic appearance, and it's going to save that out as a texture that it's then just simply going to apply directly over this scene. That's going to make everything look a little bit more realistic. Now if we click on our directional light, we can see that the mode is set to mixed. That's really important that we've got both real-time and baked in one light. Okay, what we also need to do is come over to our lighting and just ensure that our sun source is set to directional light. If it's not, just click on this, go to your scene and double click on the directional light in order to ensure that that's the case. Our environment lighting intensity multiplier, you can increase this in order to get brighter or decrease it to make it darker. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to keep mine at 1, and the environment reflections I'm going to keep at 1 as well. Alright, so as far as our light map settings are based, we probably want to keep it at the CPU for now. You can actually choose progressive GPU if you wanted, although occasionally it can crash. So before I forget, let's just save our scene for now. So CPU is far more resilient and can handle far more stuff. And let's click on our terrain, come over to our settings, and where we can see our bit on light mapping, we can see that we're using default very low resolution for now. Okay, you got a bunch of different stuff. If, for example, you jumped up to low resolution, which you could, that's going to take a lot longer. That's probably going to take about an hour, maybe half an hour, to actually create you a light map. Default very low is probably going to take about 2 or 3 minutes to actually bake you a light map. So let's just do that for now. We can always bake a more thorough one later. Okay, so I'm going to come over to my lighting setting, lighting tab, and at the bottom, just going to click Generate Lighting. It may take a while, so I'm just going to set it going, and then I'll finish this video in a second. What you're going to notice that when it starts preparing the bake and all the rest of it, some of these colours and the lighting may change, like that, for example, and it's going to, you know, basically make some changes as it goes on. I'm expected about 6 minutes, 3 minutes. This is going to change quite a lot. Probably about 3 minutes to create that bake. So I'll see you in the next video. So welcome back. So this is the completed baked light map. It took around 2 minutes and 37 seconds, and you can see everything's become a lot brighter, and the shadows have now been baked, so they look a lot nicer. So in my game tab, you can see that things are just looking a bit better now, so we can see more. Now the ground is sort of looking a little bit like snow actually, so we need to sort out the colour on that, which we will do soon. But we've got some quite nice sort of textures going on. Yeah, so everything's okay at the moment. This is without any post-processing at all going on at the moment. So I'm just going to come out of this. Now in the scene, as long as we click this and we've got everything switched on, so we've got our skybox, fog, etc. switched on, and we've got our lighting switched on. If you switch that off, you'll get this. You will notice that if I click my hierarchy on my directional light, this is still affecting my scene. So if I were to switch this off, I would get this. Okay, so it's important that we leave our light on, because this is still creating the shadows, even though technically the shadows are sort of like being sort of baked into the scene. It's still sort of baking those because of the intensity of these. Now what I want to do is I want to decrease my intensity. It's currently on 1.4. I want to bring it back down to 1 again, and my colour I can now shift over to sort of a more of a slight orangey kind of look like I had it initially. So I had it kind of a bluish realistic colour basically for the light map. And the baked light maps are just available in your light map. It's a 1024 by 1024 image. It's just a single image at this time. We can create a much more defined one a little bit later. Okay, so as you can see now, when we go into our scene, it's just looking a little bit more orangey, and it's definitely looking like middle of the day sort of stuff. Now our scene is still very, very flat. So what I'm wanting to do in this video is basically just shape this terrain so that it's not so flat anymore. Now what I'm going to do to begin with, just ensure that you click on terrain. I'm going to go into the inspector and over to the terrain settings, and where it says draw under tree and detail objects, I'm going to switch that off so that I can't see the trees. They're still there, they're just not being drawn, and it's going to make it easier to actually shape this. So let's click on the paintbrush, and we're going to go to stamp terrain. This is obviously going to show me whatever brush I have at the moment. It's going to allow me to actually stamp something onto the terrain. So for example, if I came to this one, I could stamp in a mountain or something. Just a quick heads up on how this works in terms of stamp terrain. The brush strength and the stamp height work together. So at the moment, my stamp height is at 100 meters, but my brush strength is at 0.1. So it's actually multiplying 100 by 0.1. So it's making it smaller. If I, however, move my brush strength all the way up to 1, I now get exactly 100 meters. But you can see that the actual brush has now been warped. If I make my brush size a lot bigger, then I get something much better. Okay, so that's how that works, and obviously you can rotate your brushes, so I can use the shortcut for this, so you can kind of get them to face any direction you want. Okay, so what I'm wanting to use is, let me find a good terrain brush. Yeah, something like this. Okay, so I'm going to take my stamp height, bring it way down, maybe about 10, maybe just raise it up a little bit, 20 maybe. My brush size, I'm going to bring this up probably to about here. And then my strength, I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click to stamp, and notice how that now brings my terrain up. So I'm just going to use my rotation, rotate it around, do the same again on there. I might even make this brush size a bit smaller, the strength, lower that down a little bit. Rotate around. Make brush size a bit smaller. Maybe make this a lot bigger. And then I can, for example, make this much smaller, bring my strength down a bit, and I can sort of shape little bits of these as well. Now currently my character is under the ground, which I can see there. Okay, so I need to click on my first person character and just drag him above the ground. There we go. So if I now click play at the moment, oh, I'm still below the ground there, I fell through it. Yeah, just my head popping up through the ground. Yep, that should be fine there. Oh, no. I realise what I've done. I've moved the camera. Okay, not good. Instead of moving the first person controller, I've just moved the camera. Okay, so best thing to do there is basically just delete my first person controller out of the scene and go and put another one back in. It's easier than trying to realign it. First person character, prefabs, FPS controller. Great. Now I can drag him above the ground. Great, so now you can see that we've got a lot more variation on kind of like the land and everything. We've got this interesting sort of path that you can now follow. And if any of these edges are a little bit too sharp, just go in with the smooth brush, the smooth height brush, and you can kind of smooth them out a little bit and soften them down. I may need to do a little bit of that later. But now it's starting to look a bit more like a real terrain, if you like. And let's see what it looks like once we put the trees back in there. So over to terrain, to the settings, and let's click draw again to add the trees, and let's see what this looks like. Yep, so now the trees have basically conformed to the height of the terrain. They will always stick to whatever the terrain is in terms of its height. Okay, nice. And you'll actually notice that the edges of the path have actually conformed to this as well. So that's sort of sorted out those issues where we had sort of a bit of painting going over the edge. Not so much a problem anymore at this point in time. Okay, yeah, good. If on the path you feel that this is too sharp, let's sort this out. So, for example, that bit right there. Now I'm thinking I need to smooth some of these sharper edges out. So let's just click on the paint terrain and we'll choose our smooth height. I'll choose like a noisy brush, and this time I'm going to bring my brush strength down a bit so that it doesn't affect it so much. Maybe around here I can just press my F just to get in a little bit closer. So some of this is a little bit bumpy, and what I'm going to do with this is actually bring my brush spacing up a bit and my brush size, maybe just bring this down a bit. So what I can now do is just soften this out a little bit. So just clicking and dragging, brush strength a bit higher maybe. Yeah. So what it's going to do is just make sure it's not as sharp. So onto the F. Just try not doing it at 100% strength, otherwise it will completely flatten it back down again. Might increase my strength just for this one, because I've got my brush spacing on. That's obviously restricting how it's working. There we go, and now I can see it kind of going down a little bit. So now it's more of a kind of like a little ramp as opposed to like a really kind of sharp ridge. Take a look, see if I've got any more like really sharp edges. That's relatively sharp. That's not too bad actually. I might just do a very quick kind of go over on it, something like this. They're not too bad. What about this one? Yeah, I think that's pretty sharp there, so let's just have a go on this.